So the recent box office has been really interesting to see. There have been some major hits like the Super Mario Bros. Or Across the Spider-Verse, but there have also been major bombs like The Flash and Elemental, which is pretty bad news for Disney because even their live-action remake of The Little Mermaid underperformed. The film is struggling to make $500 million worldwide. Before, these remakes were able to rake in $1 billion, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Mena Massoud, the actor who played Aladdin in their live-action remake, made a tweet where he assumed that the film wouldn't break $1 billion like his did. He ended up getting so much backlash that he deleted his Twitter, even though he really didn't say anything that negative, but in the end he was right. The film seems to be struggling just to make half of that. Many people in the media are pointing to racism as a deciding factor when it comes to the movie's underperformance. However, Across the Spider-Verse also has a diverse lead and cast, so I think the issues surrounding this movie are more nuanced than just racism. I've made videos discussing The Little Mermaid before, and I think a major factor is that people are just getting tired of these remakes. Many of the recent remakes have been underperforming, like Pinocchio or Peter Pan, and audiences basically know what they're going to get with these, which tend to be a watered down and oddly darker, literally dark, version of the original. Seriously, how is it broad daylight and things are still washed out? And that was basically true for The Little Mermaid too. It's basically the same script but way longer, and their dedication to realism makes the side characters hard to look at, while also losing the charm and expressiveness of the animation. There is a novelty of seeing something that you're familiar with in animation translated to live action, but I do think that novelty has been wearing off lately. Maybe if they had taken their time instead of pumping them out so quickly, things might have gone differently. It seems like they put a lot of eggs in this basket though. They made a lot of merchandise for this movie, like all the dolls they released, including of each of the 7 sisters. It makes me think that they expected a lot from this movie. They're also making a show on Disney Junior that's a prequel to the film, that's set in the Caribbean. They probably had this in the works for a while, but are only announcing it now. I do wish that they had adapted a Caribbean fairy tale instead of rehashing an old property like this. Disney's original works like Encanto have been very well received, as opposed to the live action fatigue we've been seeing, but I feel like they're probably in too deep to actually course correct at this point. That being said, their recent Pixar movie ended up flopping really badly, and to make things worse, Elemental is an original property. After Pixar announced that they're going to be pumping out a bunch of sequels, Elemental was actually slated to have a sequel, but that's since been cancelled for obvious reasons. The trailers for this film didn't really do it any favors, making it look pretty generic despite being an original property, where it treads on some pretty typical tropes. Opposites attract, forbidden romance, using non-human characters as an allegory for important social issues like racism, and so on and so forth. After seeing the film for myself, while it's not a bad movie, it is pretty predictable, and I'm not really surprised that it didn't capture audiences' attention the way they were hoping it would. I do feel kind of bad for the director since this was a really personal story for him. Pixar has been making more personal stories lately, like with Luca and Turning Red, both being heavily inspired by the director's lives, but with fantastical elements thrown in. In this case, Elemental is an allegory not just for racism but immigration too, where Element City was founded by water people, with the other elements coming later. And while the water, earth, and air people are able to get along more or less, they're pretty discriminatory towards the fire people, seeing them as destructive and dangerous. So they face many hardships like being denied housing because people don't want to rent to them, or being barred from public attractions. And while the film's intentions are good, with the message being that the fire people deserve the same amount of respect as everyone else, it did make some kind of weird choices that kind of go against the message. I'm not really a fan of allegories that use non-human characters like this, because oftentimes it becomes really easy to bungle the message, and that ends up happening here. Not to spoil anything, but Ember ends up causing the main conflict in the film, thanks to her temper often getting the best of her and causing her to flare up. And even worse, her mother attacks a man and threatens to kill him. She ends up not facing any consequences for this, despite the fact that that's literally attempted murder. I don't think they thought this through. I also found the world building to be pretty confusing. Again, not to spoil too much, but there's a part where Wade is eating the food of the fire people, and it's too spicy for him, so he pours his own water into a cup and then drinks it that way. So just putting the food into his own mouth is overwhelming, but then using his own water to water it down was fine. On top of that, isn't he drinking himself? I just don't get how that works. It also seemed like there was a difference between water and the water people, and water itself posed a threat to them too. So I feel like they could have focused a little more on the world building to make it less confusing. I think this kind of messaging and world building was handled better in films like Zootopia, and I would probably recommend watching that film over this one. In the end, I don't think this is what Disney and Pixar needed right now. Maybe the film will pick up once it comes to streaming, but I also think the story might have worked better as a short, instead of a $200 million movie. And things aren't looking that much better on the TV side of Disney either. Last month, Disney CEO Bob Iger said they would be cutting back on the content they produce for Disney+, admitting the content that they've been churning out hasn't actually been attracting audience members. I worry it might be a little too late, and I'm not sure if this is going to affect their live-action remake schedule, but we'll have to see what kind of effect this has on the company. Speaking of Disney making content, their latest announcement for a cartoon has gotten them in some pretty hot water, with their new show Primos, about a little girl whose cousins come to live with her for the summer. They're a Mexican-American family living in the Los Angeles area, and is apparently based on the creator Natasha Klein's own experiences growing up. However, it's been accused of being racially and culturally insensitive. I'm not a fan of this art style, and I can definitely see why people would take issue with some of the character designs, as well as some of the other choices, like having the town they reside in be called Earthquake Heights. Wouldn't that be like calling a town in Florida Hurricaneville? Or a town in California Wildfire Heights? Seems pretty distasteful, Disney. Their use of the Spanish language has also been called into question, since they're constantly making grammatical errors, including in the theme song. Unfortunately, the crew behind the show did not handle these accusations very well. The voice actor for the main character came out and made things 100 times worse, where she said that Spanish pretty much doesn't matter because it's a colonizer language, and that Latin Americans should be identified as Native Americans because the Spanish language is offensive, I guess?
The Spanish language is not a Latin American language. It's a language the Spanish conquistadors forced upon Latin American people. The only reason we're Latin people and not Native American people is because of that distinction. So be mad at me all you want for misspelling words in Spanish. Be mad at me all you want for mispronouncing words in Spanish. That doesn't take away from the fact that I am a Mexican-American, Native American woman.
I mean, she basically said that Latin American is not valid as an identity. To add insult to injury, she said all this in English. I really can't imagine a worse response. She comes off as so smug, too. You know, they probably could have just said that the main character, whose name is Tater, by the way, after having grown up in America, is not very familiar with the Spanish language, but is trying to learn, and is going to use the summer to get more in touch with her Latin roots. So the grammatical errors are part of her character, and she would work on it to educate herself to where she can be fluent in the language. Instead, they said that Spanish sucks. Yeah, that's really gonna get people on your side. I mean, she says they're trying to make a show for people who feel left out and are trying to learn, but then she also dismissed Spanish and Latin American culture.
We're trying to make a good show for kids that feel left out, for kids that are different, for kids who don't have a full grasp on any language, no matter where they live.
Can you really have it both ways? I'm just saying. Hey everyone, Editing Jay here. It turns out that there was an update where the creator had an interview where she said that this is basically from Tater's perspective and she's not good at Spanish. I don't know why they didn't lead with this, and the voice actor definitely didn't help with her statements. As far as I know, she hasn't apologized for that at all, so we'll have to see where that goes. But I just wanted to pop in with this update. So let's get back to the video. It just seems like Disney's been making a lot of blunders recently, and I can't help but feel like they're doing it to themselves at this point. I mean, Disney and Pixar has such a long history and so many amazing properties under their belt, but recently it feels like they're just so confident with their nostalgia baits and constantly churning out content without really considering the audience. They can do better. We'll see what the second half of this year has in store for the companies, but overall I'm rather disappointed, but that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? I'd love to hear from you, so let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members: Stutania, Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, The Rabbit Mancer, General Bolivar, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Hussyman42, Nixel, Phil C, Taylor Ramirez, Caleb Nelson, Dakari the Professor, Equestron, Norman Sweetcream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Garcia XV Legend, Hunter Rose, Dash Hound, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Butcher7 Actual, Felix Bam, Soundboy00, Owen Wildish, Player Zero, Kitsune Fiora, Lucas Geist, Dana Dine Executive, Jay Draws, Ninja Rex, Blue Spirit, and Bandito Bane. Thank you all so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button, and if you enjoyed this content, you can leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and that part's free. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way, but any support would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.